LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 30th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 16 best, most informative, newsworthy clips for what should be really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. I have taken my clips from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I also have a political comedy clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last night. Not something that's available free on their YouTube channel, which there's a link down to that in the video description. This is actually right at the beginning of the panel discussion when Bill Maher throws out half the Democrats who are in the Democratic debates on Wednesday and Thursday. I actually covered the debates on Wednesday and Thursday pretty extensively, 15 top clips and my criticism and commentary. There's a link down in the video description to my debates clip roundup that I did Friday around midday, or I think it was actually like 1 o'clock or something, but I finally got all the clips and did the commentary, so you can watch that, and there will be some debate fallout. That's about half the clips. The second half of the clips are the Democrats. That's the second half of my topic, Dictators or Democrats, because Trump was on a foreign trip and coddled some dictators. That'll be the first several clips I show. But I want to start with a political comedy clip, as I said, from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday. This is Bill Maher doing us all a service. I don't know. Well, maybe some of these candidates are your candidates. You can let me know down in the comment section while we watch it. But this is a little under 2 minutes where Bill Maher gets rid of 10 of the candidates right away so that we can concentrate on the top 10 from the debates, I guess, over here.
Look, there's too many people in this race, right? So we saw them last night and the night before. I think tonight, I'll give you veto rights, but I'm going to get rid of 10 of them right now. Is that okay? Can we just feel, okay? And if you disagree, just say, but okay, this guy, Hickenlooper, nice guy, no, get out, okay? Nice guy, get the fuck out. Okay, this is Michael Bennett. You know, if you Google Michael Bennett, the first 5 that come up aren't even this guy, named Michael Bennett. Get the fuck out. Okay. Vice Principal Delaney, nice guy again, another year. Get out. Tim Ryan, I think he said one good thing. No. I like him. Kirsten Gillibrand. Al Franken says hello. Eric Swalwell, I like him, but, you know, too young. Looked like he was wearing a toupee last night. Get the fuck out. Marianne Williamson.
Wait.
What?
We need to get... No, she was never supposed to be there.
Who?
The
Marianne
crazy
Williamson?
hippie lady. Yeah, no. I heard that there were too many Democrats. She snuck through security. She got herself on stage. And Rachel Maddow was just too overwhelmed and didn't notice.
Okay. She said a great thing about health care that I'm going to try to read after the show. I mean, during the show. But Andrew Yang, really smart guy, wrong business. You're in the wrong business. Beto, I like Beto a lot. I talked to him for... You want
Pastor Beto.
You want him still in?
Well,
should I?
He reminds my daughter of a youth pastor, so I feel badly to let
You can
him
have
go.
the picture.
Okay, thanks.
But he's not doing good. It's not looking good.
It's not going well.
It's not going well.
It's not going well.
And this guy starts spreading the news. You're leaving today. Okay. All right. So now we got it down to 10, right? Okay.
So that was Bill Maher with the help of Joy Reid and Max Brooks from the panel, getting rid of 10 Democrats. I don't know, the Kirsten Gillibrand one seemed that was a little bit of Bill Maher's anti-Me Too backlash there. I don't know. Kirsten Gillibrand was one of the ones who's been held responsible for the demise of Al Franken's career in the Senate. You can, I don't know if that's... putting too much blame on that one particular senator, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But Bill Maher is obviously, as a political comedian, I guess, has a lot of empathy for Al Franken, who was also a political comedian, I guess, and that's why that was almost like a mobster thing. Like, Al Franken says hello. That's what you say before you, like, shoot the guy who killed Al Franken, right? So, Anyway, but most of those candidates, if you watch my debate clip roundup, were the ones that I also did not focus on, that I thought were the less memorable time for them to go type of candidates, maybe. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments section, like I said. And I am going to get back to the fallout from the Democratic debate in like the starting with clip 7 or 8 here, because clip 7 is like a... Oh, that reminds me, down in the video description, you can follow along with my clip list. So if you want to know what I mean when I say clip 7 or 8, I have a link down there to my clip list here. 16 clips, my kind of cryptic notes to myself. And you'll see that the clip after that, clip 1 there was the political comedy clip. Now clips 2 through 6 are all about Trump's foreign trip. And especially overnight, I watched this live because I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw Trump step into North Korea. It's kind of like the reality show I was talking about last week. And that's really the standard I want to hold the news media to in the next 5 clips here, because all 5 of the news networks did a news summary on this, and most of them kind of, to some extent or another, carried the Trump narrative of, and this was like all form and no substance, this handshake and this walk into North Korea. I mean, maybe it will get the stalled talks restarted, but one thing that they never mention here is that Trump didn't say the word denuclearization anywhere during the hour that he had this meeting with Kim Jong-un, or, at least never publicly. And another thing, they seem to say that this was spontaneous, but I remember a couple weeks ago on Donald Trump's birthday when he got this really nice special letter from Kim Jong-un. He said that, there might be some news in it, you'll know in a couple weeks, and that was a couple weeks ago, and it makes me think that this whole, handshake in the DMZ has had more planning than we've been led to believe, and that hasn't got a lot of coverage. It was more like this spontaneous Trump tweet, and it took less than 36 hours, and they had the whole thing. There was a little coverage of the fact that it might have been somewhat pre-planned, but I'm going to show all 5 of the corporate news outlets. I'm going to show you NBC and CBS and ABC and CNN and then Fox News, all covering the Trump reality show meeting with Kim Jong-un, kind of covering up some of the other dictators he coddled on his trip, including Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince in Saudi Arabia. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch this first of the news summaries over here.
We're going to get to all the big political news of the week in a moment, but we're going to begin this morning with President Trump's visit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un at the DMZ. It was an historic first as the two agreed to resume their efforts at a nuclear agreement.
It is good to see you again. I've never expected to meet you at this place.
The president then walked over the border, briefly, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to step into North Korea. Afterwards, Mr. Trump spoke to reporters.
It's just an honor to be with you, and it was an honor that you asked me to step over that line, and I was proud to step over the line.
NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is at the DMZ. Okay, Richard, is this just a moment for a headline, or is there some substance to this?
So at least Chuck Todd and Richard Engel there had a conversation about the big issue, is this reality show TV or is there real diplomacy going on here? And, the Trump foreign policy towards North Korea, at first he, had all his bellicose words on Twitter, and he, created more of a crisis than there actually was. And you heard in the news conference, if you watched it in the middle of the night, like I did, Trump claimed that the Obama administration was about to go to war with North Korea, that they begged for a meeting and couldn't get one, and that's all fake news, I guess. But that's one I mentioned that I was going to talk about Trump coddling up to dictators. He talked with Vladimir Putin about the problem of fake news in the United States and said, you don't have that problem in Russia. And he says, oh, we have it here too. And then he also talked about, a journalist asked him, are you going to ask Vladimir Putin not to meddle in the 2020 elections? And he said, okay, Vladimir, don't meddle in the elections. Don't meddle in the elections. It was like a big joke, and that was barely covered. Actually, on Fox News Sunday, in the panel discussion, they showed the clips of Trump doing the two things I just mentioned, but then they said, oh, it was all just lighthearted. Trump didn't mean anything by it. He's not saying, like, come in and get me elected in 2020 like you did in 2016. No. But anyway, I want to get to the CBS Face the Nation news summary, which also, I think, treated this as, the big historic moment and not the reality show TV. And also very much talks about this as, like, spontaneous coming from Trump's tweet, even though I think it may go all the way back to that birthday letter from Kim Jong-un to Trump a couple weeks ago, and it's been in the works for a couple weeks. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that CBS Face the Nation news summary here.
Face the Nation. We begin today with CBS News White House correspondent Weijia Jiang, who is in Seoul, South Korea, where she has been covering the president's historic visit to North Korea.
Good morning, Margaret. The suspense over whether President Trump and North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un would meet quickly turned into frenzy over a historic episode that lasted much longer than expected. In fact, even President Trump admitted he was surprised the meeting happened at all. President Trump and Kim walked toward each other from opposite sides of the joint security area in the DMZ, the demilitarized border zone that separates North and South Korea. After a handshake, Mr. Trump became the first U.S. sitting president to cross over the line of demarcation into North Korea, something he said he was proud to do. Then the two leaders met for nearly 1 hour, and it all came about because of a tweet President Trump sent yesterday, inviting Kim to the DMZ to say hello and shake hands. Kim said he was surprised at the gesture and by the president's willingness to see him there. President Trump described the meeting as strong and solid and said negotiating teams would be meeting in the next 2 or 3 weeks to start crafting a deal for Pyongyang to give up its nuclear weapons. He also said he would invite Kim to the White House, but did not provide a time frame for when. Margaret?
Weijia Jiang in Seoul. We go now to some analysis on this morning's events. Jean Lee is director of the Korea Center at the Wilson Center, and Mike Morell is a former acting director of the CIA.
And Mike Morell, at least on CBS's Face the Nation, did talk about both the potential gains from this gambit and then all the costs from Trump giving all this legitimacy to Kim Jong-un with really not getting anything for meeting with him and going into North Korea and like doing all these things that are propaganda bonanzas for the North Korean regime and really not getting any concessions for it. And so even though that news summary was pretty much a submission to the Trump narrative about this big historic moment, there was some analysis afterwards. And Jonathan Karl and George Stephanopoulos also did, George Stephanopoulos did a brief news summary about a minute long and then came over to Jonathan Karl where he said something that I noticed on Twitter has gotten a lot of criticism, where he says, in terms of presentation, this is the best moment of the Trump presidency. But I think the in terms of presentation clause at the beginning of what Jonathan Karl says, he's basically saying this is reality TV. So I think maybe Twitter's been a little harsh on what Jonathan Karl says at the end of this minute 14-second clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Morning, we want to get right to that breaking news, a bit of history made just hours ago. President Trump, the first sitting president to set foot in North Korea. There you see him at the DMZ, that dangerous dividing line for more than 60 years, shaking hands first with Kim Jong-un. Then together they cross over into North Korea. The history right there, and after that, a 40-minute private meeting in Freedom House with the South Korean president. They agreed to restart the nuclear talks, which collapsed in Hanoi earlier this year. And President Trump clearly thrilled with the result.
This is a historic moment. I think the relationship that we've developed has meant so much to so many people. And it's just an honor to be with you, and it was an honor that you asked me to step over that line, and I was proud to step over the line. I thought you might do that. I wasn't sure, but I was ready to do it, and I want to thank you. It's been great.
Our chief White House correspondent John Carl on the scene in Seoul. And John, the president said he wasn't sure this would happen. He certainly is pleased that it did.
In terms of sheer performance, George, this may be the biggest moment of the Trump presidency so far. The president took a big gamble by issuing the last-minute.
But did he take a big gamble? I have this feeling that there was something about this demilitarized DMZ handshake in the Kim Jong-un letter to Trump on his birthday a couple weeks ago, and there was even some reporting that Jonathan Karl talked about in the rest of that clip I didn't show. And by the way, of course, you can see the whole ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos and the source of all my clips at links that are down in the video description. And there's some reporting that maybe, Jonathan Karl says there was like a 5% chance this might happen a week ago. And there was definitely some pre-planning, and I think, like I said, it goes back to the Kim Jong-un Trump birthday letter that he talked about a couple weeks ago, where if you saw what he said in his weird press conferences where the helicopter blades are going, or he doesn't like to have real press conferences, although he did an hour with the press after this meeting with Kim Jong-un, and that's what I watched in the middle of the night. But there was much more heat than light in that press conference, so I didn't take any clips from that. But anyway, you can tell me what you think of Jonathan Karl saying that in terms of performance, this is the best moment of the Trump presidency. Is that some terrible moment from Jonathan Karl, or is he really talking about Trump's reality TV show, and this was a big cliffhanger moment? And anyway, the next clip is from CNN State of the Union. Brianna Keilar is the guest host for Jake Tapper, and the State of the Union from her this week is reconsidering using Twitter as a tool of diplomacy. And then a brief, this is the shortest of the news summaries from CNN, which I will talk about after I watch it with you over here.
Hello, I'm Brianna Keilar in for Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is reconsidering the use of Twitter as a diplomatic tool. We begin with breaking news out of North Korea, where President Trump and Kim Jong-un have agreed to restart stalled talks over North Korea's nuclear program after President Trump became the first sitting U.S. president to set foot on North Korean soil. President Trump then met with Chairman Kim for roughly 50 minutes and emerged to say that negotiations between the two nations would begin again in 2 to 3 weeks. This unprecedented meeting came after President Trump sent a tweet offering to meet with Kim just a day before he was set to visit the heavily fortified demilitarized zone separating North and South Korea. And it quickly became more than the quick handshake that President Trump had proposed. President Trump did not detail any commitments or concessions from North Korea ahead of the upcoming talks, which last stalled in February. But the president appeared to be betting his personal relationship with Kim could achieve what former presidents had failed to accomplish. For more, I want to bring in CNN international correspondent Will Ripley. He is in Seoul.
So, yeah, like I said, that's the CBS Face the Nation news summary, which I kind of criticized before I showed it. And now the final news summary and the final clip on the Trump coddling dictators topic. Well, the next one is kind of transitional between this topic and the next topic. But This is the Fox News Sunday news summary. Chris Wallace does an introduction, which does talk about the North Korean handshake, the reset with China, which I don't know if that's really been reset, and then Chris Wallace goes over to the reporter John Roberts, and there's very little criticism of Trump or even analysis of what Trump did other than the reality show Trump handshake with North Korea. There's like a brief moment in John Roberts' report where he says maybe nothing will come of this, but I think, something I learned when I learned legal argumentation as a lawyer is if you want to hide something in your argument, you put it in the middle. Because people have good memory for what you say at the beginning, that's called primacy, and what you say at the end, that's a recency, but if you hide it in the middle, people don't remember it. And John Roberts definitely hides in the middle of his report the fact that nothing may come of this, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch that Fox News Sunday news summary of the Trump reality show handshake with Kim Jong-un and stepping into North Korea over here.
Hello again from Fox News in Washington. President Trump has wrapped up his trip to Asia with a handshake with Kim Jong-un, a walk into North Korea, and an agreement to revive nuclear talks. All this just a day after hitting the reset button with China in the ongoing trade war between the world's two biggest economies. In a moment, we'll speak with the president's top White House economic advisor, Larry Kudlow. But first, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts reports from South Korea on today's dramatic developments.
The two leaders walked right up to the line between North and South, shook hands. Then President Trump stepped into history, becoming the first sitting American president to walk on North Korean soil.
This is a historic moment, the fact that we're meeting.
After a photo op to document the moment, the president and Kim Jong-un then walked back into South Korea, completing a diplomatic journey without precedent.
A lot of progress has been made. A lot of friendships have been made, and we liked each other from day one, and that was very important.
President Trump said the invitation to meet Kim was on a whim, tweeting that he planned to visit the DMZ with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Would Kim like to join them? The meeting was supposed to last just a few minutes, but stretched to more than an hour.
I enjoy being with you, and thank you very much.
Their last meeting in Hanoi in February ended badly after President Trump rejected Kim's offer to shutter the Yongbyon nuclear facility and said only full, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization would lead to sanctions being lifted. In their impromptu bilat today, the two agreed to restart talks that had been suspended since Hanoi. Today's meeting was a gamble. It could have yielded nothing and may still lead nowhere. But in making history, President Trump hopes to shake something loose. South Korean President Moon had high praise for President Trump today, saying he hopes the president will finally be the one to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. We're still a long way from that, but President Trump is in no hurry, saying better to get it right than to rush it. Chris?
John Roberts reporting from Seoul. John, thank you.
So, yeah, I guess that John Roberts piece didn't, it wasn't exactly in the middle where he mentioned that the talks may come to nothing. But the other thing I did most of my criticism before I showed the clip, but the one thing I forgot to mention was the way John Roberts definitely followed the Trump administration narrative as to why the Hanoi talks broke down, because of all that Kim offered was shutting down that Pyongyang, or am I even pronouncing that right, the nuclear plant, and it wasn't about, there was actually a whole different North Korean narrative as to why the talks broke down. Had to do with whether there'd be some sanction relief before total denuclearization. But anyway, that's the last clip that's totally on the North Korean and the coddling dictators topic. But this next clip is sort of a transitional clip. It's from CNN's State of the Union, where Brianna Keilar talks to Amy Klobuchar. This is about the attack on Kamala Harris that after the Democratic debates, there was this supposedly bot-supported attack claiming she's not a real American black because she's half Jamaican and half Indian, because she's only half black, and her African-American half comes from, or her African half is, African-American because Jamaica is also in the Americas, but she has Jamaican heritage, so that's not like it's not her ancestors weren't like brought as slaves to Charleston, North Carolina or whatever, or South Carolina, excuse me. Which Carolina? Anyway, that was the bot attack, and you'll see here that Brianna Keilar on CNN's State of the Union asked Amy Klobuchar about that bot attack and about the evidence that it was Russian-backed, and she doesn't really give any evidence, but then she also talks about the way that Trump was coddling dictators on his foreign trip, so that's why this is the transitional clip between the Trump coddles foreign dictators on, or coddles dictators on his foreign trip, and then transitioning over to the fallout from the Democratic debate topic with this CNN State of the Union clip from this morning over here.
You mentioned Russia. You also mentioned Russia when you tweeted your condemnation of the racist attacks against your colleague and fellow candidate, Senator Kamala Harris. You said, "We are better than this. Russia is not, and stand united against this type of vile behavior." Are you saying that you believe Russia is responsible for this?
You know what? I have no idea who's responsible for it. I just know that they have messed around on the internet many times with bots and other things, and there's been some connection to them way past the 2016 presidential election. But I think the bigger point I was making in light of President Trump's hanging out with Vladimir Putin again is that we are a country that is supposed to be about the truth. We are a country that is supposed to be about a free democracy. Russia is not that. They do not have free elections. They conduct propaganda campaigns in the United States and all over the world. We don't want to be part of that, and we certainly don't want to have relatives of the President of the United States furthering this kind of stuff. And the President himself, when he sent out the doctored video of Nancy Pelosi, just another example of messing around with our democracy. And it certainly explains to me, Brianna, why just this last year, when we were trying to move our bipartisan bill for backup paper ballots across this country to protect our democracy, that I got gut punched from the White House. They made calls, and they stopped it in its tracks, even though it would pass the Senate with overwhelming votes. They don't want this free election. You can tell by every move they make and everything the president says.
Let's turn to immigration now. This week, Congress.
So, yeah, they're from Senator Amy Klobuchar. You see some good evidence of Trump coddling dictators. Why has the Trump administration and the Republicans squashed Amy Klobuchar's bill that for election security and paper ballots to make sure that we have a way to check if our elections have been hacked by the Russians? And you put that together with Trump joking with Putin and all the stuff in the Mueller report, and notice there is like no real coverage of the Mueller report and Trump collusion and Trump obstruction this week. I don't know if that was one of the points of the meeting with Kim Jong-un and trying to change the news cycle, but that also didn't come up that much in the Democratic debates, and that's the next topic. Amy Klobuchar was talking about it a little bit. She didn't really talk about Mohammed bin Salman and the coddling of the Saudi Arabian crown prince that also took place on this foreign trip, where Trump would not really talk about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and was like claiming that the Saudi Arabians are prosecuting 13, maybe even more than 13 people, and not talking about their actual responsibility for the killing. But anyway, that's the last of the coddling dictator topic that I want to talk about, and now I'm going to move on to the fallout from the Democratic debate. Again, if you want to see, I covered both the clips from night 1 of the debate on Wednesday, June 26th, and night 2 of the debate. I don't know if which of those candidates are your favorite candidate, but I did take 15 clips and spend a lot of time talking about the debate at a link down I put in the video description to my debates clip roundup that I did on Friday. So if you want more information about that, check that out. But now I want to go to the fallout from the debate. And actually, NBC News' Meet the Press did the best roundup or did the best news summary of the fallout from the debate. Of course, it was an NBC News debate. And you'll see Chuck Todd here both do a live introduction where he talks about how Democrats are moving left and Kamala Harris roughed up Joe Biden, and then actually goes to a poll of how the actual Democratic voting electorate isn't as liberal as you might think from Twitter. It's actually all over 55, which even I'm not quite over 55 yet, so that's how old the Democratic voters are generally. But and then he goes into a package that talks about the debate, mostly about the Biden versus Harris conflict that I covered also in my debate clip roundup. But I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch Chuck Todd's live news summary and then his pre-recorded news package over here.
It's big political news. And what we think we learned from the 2 nights of Democratic presidential debates, we think we learned that the party center of gravity, or at least the candidates believe the party center of gravity, has moved sharply to the left, especially on issues like healthcare and immigration. We learned that Kamala Harris's big viral moment showed that she was worthy of the hype that had accompanied her entry into the race and that had eluded her since then. We learned from that same viral moment that Joe Biden has no glide path to this nomination. He still has to earn it. We also should learn to be cautious about putting too much stock into the social media analysis and Twitter chatter post-debate. Realize this, 64% of people who watched the debates on television were 55 or older. That's not exactly the social media progressive demographic, and those older viewers may be more sympathetic to Biden. Most of all, we learned that this nomination battle is wide open, with no prohibitive favorite, in a party trying to decide exactly how far to the left it wants to go.
I respect Senator Harris. But, we all know that 30 seconds to 60 seconds on a campaign debate exchange can't do justice to a lifetime committed to civil rights.
Vice President Biden is on defense after that bruising debate performance in a race that now appears wide open.
I agree that everybody, once they, in fact, anyway, my time's up.
Biden's apparent political vulnerabilities were on display on Thursday night as Senator Kamala Harris punctured his aura of inevitability.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of 2 United States senators who built their reputations and career on the segregation of race in this country. You also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the 2nd class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
It's a mischaracterization of my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true, number one. Number two, if we want to have this campaign litigated on who supports civil rights and whether I did or not, I'm happy to do that.
Harris has since doubled down.
I just think he and I have a difference of opinion and also a difference of opinion on states' rights.
I never, ever oppose voluntary busing.
The central premise of Biden's campaign has been that he is the Democrat best equipped to take on President Trump and beat him.
What is that first issue for your presidency?
The first thing I would do is make sure that we defeat Donald Trump. Okay. Period.
Biden has shown durability over months where his record has been litigated in the press. But after the debate, some Democrats are calling him a fragile frontrunner.
Who do you think could go up against President Trump?
I feel like Harris definitely could.
As the party shifts to the left, Harris again found herself backtracking on the issue of government-run health care.
Who here would abolish their private health insurance in favor of a government-run plan?
But after the debate, Harris said she misunderstood the question.
Do you believe that private insurance should be eliminated in this country?
No.
You don't?
No, I do not.
But you raised your hand last night.
But the question was, would you give up your private insurance for that option? And I said yes.
The debates have showcased the party's leftward shift on the economy, healthcare, taxes, and national security policy, led by Senators Elizabeth Warren,
calling out the names of the monopolists,
and Bernie Sanders.
We will have Medicare for all.
And on immigration.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
And joining me now is presidential candidate, Democratic.
So, yeah, I thought that news summary from Meet the Press was pretty good. You know, Chuck Todd has gotten a lot of criticism both for his moderation of the debate and for his interview of Donald Trump last Sunday. I criticized his interview of Donald Trump last Sunday, and I saw Stephen Colbert especially on the second night when he did this whole thing in his monologue where he dressed up. He put on the Chuck Todd beard and claimed that Chuck Todd loved the sound of his own voice, and he was joined by Chris Christie and a huge pylon of Chuck Todd. I mean, it certainly wasn't his best performance as a journalist, and some of his questions were kind of silly, I thought, but I don't know why he's gone. I mean, I can't defend. I always seem to be defending Chuck Todd against people who hate him. I don't know. It's not like I'm a Chuck Todd lover, but I'm just not a Chuck Todd hater. Anyway, I thought that was a good news summary, and especially compared to this Fox News sort of summary I'm about to show. This is actually Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday summarizing what happened to Joe Biden in his questioning of the chair of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez. And, I mean, Chuck Todd and his producers there in that last news summary you watched were pretty honest about some of the problems Biden had in the debate, and I also covered those in my debate clip roundup, again, which is at a link down in the video description. But here on Fox News Sunday, it's almost like Fox News still thinks Biden's going to be the nominee, and they're trying to spin this in the way that hurts the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, as much as possible, especially with black voters, to suppress the black vote, because that's one of the ways Trump won in 2016. I mean, listen to this whole thing here where Chris Wallace, first he's harping on with Tom Perez about how much did this hurt Biden? How much did it hurt him? And then in the follow-up questions, you'll see Chris Wallace giving this point-by-point way in which Biden supported or was opposed to busing, and that's not even really a big issue. And then he keeps saying busing was the main tool to desegregate schools. How do you feel about supporting a nominee who opposed the main tool to desegregate schools at the time? And I'm not even sure that's true. And I'll show a Bernie Sanders clip in a couple minutes talking about how fair housing is actually the best way to desegregate schools. But anyway, here is Chris Wallace trying to, it seems almost like this is over 5 minutes long. It's Chris Wallace, like I said, questioning the chair of the DNC, Tom Perez, but the whole thing seems to be configured to hurt Joe Biden as the supposedly most likely Democratic nominee in Fox News world, I guess, as I'll discuss with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
The Democratic presidential candidate squared off this week for the first time in 2 nights of debates, which produced a number of contentious moments and raised new doubts about the party's frontrunner. Democratic Party Chair Tom Perez joins us to discuss where the race for the nomination stands now. Chairman, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Always good to be with you, Chris.
All right, I want to start, as I suspect everybody would, with the bruising confrontation Thursday night between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Here is just part of that.
You also worked with them to oppose busing. And, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools, and she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
It's a mischaracterization of my position across the board. I did not praise racist. That is not true.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No,
do you agree?
I did not oppose busing in America. What I opposed is busing ordered by the Department of Education. That's what I opposed.
How badly was Joe Biden, who is the Democratic frontrunner, damaged by that confrontation?
Listen, Chris, voters are going to look at the totality of everybody's record. And the reality is every single Democrat running for president on the issue of civil rights is so far ahead of where this president is, whether it's fighting for voting rights, whether it's fighting to make sure we
I understand, but let's not get off Joe Biden.
No. That'll be up for the voters to decide. We have another debate coming up in a month. Again, they're out on the stump every single day. And what voters are going to do, and the reason I'm excited about what we had last week is I think voters saw that we have a deep bench and that our focus on issues of health care, making sure this economy works for everyone, those are the issues that animate people. And
we're going to get to all of that. On Friday, because clearly Biden thought that he'd been damaged, he tried to repair what had gone on Thursday night with Kamala Harris. Let's take a look at that.
I respect Senator Harris. But, you know, we all know that 30 seconds to 60 seconds on a campaign debate exchange can't do justice to a lifetime committed to civil rights.
Biden said that he never opposed voluntary busing, but that badly distorts his actual record. I want to take a look at this. In 1975, Biden supported an anti-busing measure from then segregationist Senator Jesse Helms. In 1976, he introduced a measure to block the Justice Department from seeking busing orders in the courts to desegregate schools. And Biden said this in an interview in 75. I oppose busing. It's an asinine concept, the utility of which has never been proven to me. Chairman Perez, Biden's record against busing is clear.
Well, listen, Biden's overall record on civil rights is clear, and the Democratic Party's overall record on civil rights is clear. And what I always want when I was running for office, and what I know these candidates want, is they want you to look at the totality of what they've done in their career. The totality of fighting for voting rights, fighting to make sure we hold police departments accountable, fighting to make sure that women have equal pay for equal work, that we pass the Violence Against Women Act. And on this score, Vice President Biden and other Democrats have been leading the charge. And we have a frontal assault with this president on these basic core civil rights. And that's what this is about. That's what this campaign is going to be about.
I understand the distinction between Democrats and Republicans, but I'm talking about the fight for the nomination within your party. And the question is the Democratic Party going to nominate someone who opposed the main tool at one point to desegregate public schools in this country?
The Democratic Party is that's going to be up to the voters, and they're going to look at the totality of everybody's record, what they've said, what they have done, and who is fighting for them. And on all of these issues, whether it's the economy, whether it's civil rights, every Democrat has the backs of people, and that's what I think voters are going to see.
Does it bother you personally? You're the chairman of the party. Does it bother you personally that Joe Biden opposed the main tool to desegregate schools?
Well, listen, it's up to the vice president to explain his position. It's up to the vice president to explain everything he has done in his career. And that's what he did Friday, and that's what he'll continue to do. Because, again, I know him well. He has fought for equality and opportunity. You look at what happened with
not in this
gay
case.
marriage.
Not in this case, he didn't.
Well, again, the voters will have to look at the totality of the vice president's record and every candidate's record. And I invite them to kick the tires on all of our candidates, because the good news is that the difference between us and this president is night and day on these issues of civil rights. The party of Lincoln used to be the party of civil rights, and the party of Lincoln is dead. It's the Democratic Party that's fighting to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to realize the American dream.
Let's turn to another key moment in
the party of Lincoln is dead. So I think that is a sentence that needs to be repeated more and more often after Trump took over the Republican Party, which wasn't really much of the party of Lincoln. Well, I mean, Lincoln also was racist, but if you know anything about Lincoln, I mean, he freed the slaves, but he, in contemporary terms, he was definitely racist, just like pretty much everybody back in 1860 or whatever. But the party of Lincoln is dead, and I didn't really want to focus on what Tom Perez said there in response to Chris Wallace. I think what Chris Wallace did say there proved the criticism I made before I showed the clip about how that was all about trying to show that, I mean, who cares so much about the minutia of busing in the 1970s other than people on Fox News? And are they even going to hold Republicans? I mean, if they're, like I said, I think that's all part of the Trump/Republican effort to suppress the black turnout for the Democratic candidate they think is still the front runner, Joe Biden. And so they're trying to make him seem as racist as possible, even though we have like a racist, white supremacist, white nationalist president, Donald Trump, which I've talked about many times in the past with lots of evidence. If you can argue with me down in the comments section if you want, especially for the recorded show. I always respond to comments for the recorded show. Sometimes I've been trying to read the live comments. They're like whizzing by during the live show, but you can watch those yourself. If you're a recorded show viewer, you know, you can watch it with the live comments going by, and you can see all how there's a big discussion going on in the comment section, which I always appreciate and I try to follow. But as I said before, I showed that clip as to whether Chris Wallace was correct to keep saying that busing was the what's it he kept saying? The main tool to desegregate the schools. Well, I think fair housing, that means, because the problem is that our neighborhoods are segregated, and that's why you need busing to like move people from one neighborhood to another. But you know, the real solution is to desegregate our neighborhoods, and that's something that Bernie Sanders talks about with George Stephanopoulos. When George Stephanopoulos says, "Oh, you might not be totally opposed to busing. Are you in favor of busing?" And this is a much shorter clip I'll discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
I want to pick up on an issue that came up in Thursday night's debate. It was between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, her raising his opposition to busing back in the 1970s. I want to bring the debate forward. You've mentioned that you're concerned about the idea of resegregation of our schools. Does that mean that busing should be on the table today?
Well, I think resegregation is a very, very serious problem, and the federal government has failed in fighting for fair housing legislation. We need, basically, in this country, well-funded public schools. We need to honor our teachers, respect teachers, make sure that they're earning a living wage. We need to take care of those schools today which have a lot of kids who are, in some cases, actually hungry, coming from troubled families. We need to build public education in this country. We need to make sure that kids go to community schools which are integrated. And that means we have to focus on fair housing legislation and enforcement.
But does that also mean busing? Because your website actually says that you're coming out for repealing of the ban on funding for busing.
No, busing is certainly an option that is necessary in certain cases, but it is not the optimal. Does anybody think it's a good idea to put a kid on a bus, travel an hour to another school, into another neighborhood that he or she doesn't know? That's not the optimal. What is the optimal is to have great community schools which are integrated. That's what I think most people want to see. That's what I want to see.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thanks for your time this morning.
And, you know, Bernie Sanders was so much better on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning than he was in the debate on Thursday. If you watch my debate clip roundup at the link down in the video description, I said that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden were the two biggest losers. I thought Bernie Sanders was like using a lot of talking points he could have used 4 years ago against Hillary Clinton, but he was a lot more interactive and responsive to specific issues in his interview with George Stephanopoulos this morning, and I hope that's the Bernie Sanders that shows up for the second set of debates, which are at the end of July on CNN. But I also thought Bernie did a good job there of talking about how, busing might be necessary, but it's not optimal. And, that's what Joe Biden should have said in the debate. And speaking of people who wish they could have said different things in the debate, the next clip I have, and it's sort of the last clip on this Kamala Harris versus Joe Biden topic, it's Cory Booker, who was so unlucky. First there was this meme of him like looking over at Beto O'Rourke talking Spanish, thinking, I was going to talk Spanish, and there was like this Curb Your Enthusiasm music looking at his expression, because Cory Booker had this whole like Spanish thing planned, but Beto O'Rourke did it first. And then if you really think about it, he got totally hosed by the draw on the debates, because, he was on the first night here with just like Elizabeth Warren was the only front runner with Cory Booker, while Kamala Harris got to go against Joe Biden, the front runner, and got to do the whole like you supported busing. And the thing is, Cory Booker had actually tried to attack Joe Biden on race because, he said he was civil with segregationists, and they didn't call him boy, and he got some coverage on that. And then he also attacked Joe Biden after the debate for using the word gangbanger, but neither of those attacks, of course, get the coverage of the 18 million viewers who watched the Democratic debates. But Cory Booker didn't have a chance to go up against Joe Biden, even though he could have done the whole Kamala Harris thing. And so he's just a very, very unlucky guy, which is the subtext, I think, of this clip talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press this morning over here.
Yes, it was. Let me start with what happened on Thursday night, because I want to hear your reaction to the back and forth between Vice President Biden and Senator Harris, specifically Senator Harris's critique. Do you believe her critique was fair and accurate on the Vice President's record?
Look, I was talking about the Vice President's comments well before the debate, where he used words like boy in a way that caused a lot of hurt and harm, and I called him out on it. And instead of coming forward and saying I could have said that better, or let me tell you what I meant, he fell into a defensive crouch and tried to reassign blame and said that I should apologize to him. Whoever our nominee is going to be, whoever the next president is going to be, really needs to be someone who can talk openly and honestly about race with vulnerability, because none of us are perfect, but really call this country to common ground, to reconciliation. I'm not sure if Vice President Biden is up to that task, given the way this last 3 weeks have played out. And frankly, I know whoever is that nominee needs to be able to pull this country together, because we need to reconcile.
I want to play a quote the Vice President said on Friday that you took some issue with on Twitter, but let me play that quote and then get you to react on the other side. Here it is.
We got to recognize that kid wearing a hoodie may very well be the next poet laureate and not a gangbanger.
Now, after your criticism on Twitter, the Vice President's campaign put out their own statement. I want to put it up and then get you to react. Vice President Biden, like many leaders over the years, was calling direct attention to the daily experiences faced by many African-American men around the country and the perceived so-called threat from people like Trayvon Martin, who were racially profiled and deemed criminal while wearing a hoodie. As the context of his remarks noted, we needed to make sure black mothers feel confident when they send their child, their son, out on the streets, that they're going to feel safe. But they didn't address the use of the word gangbanger, which was the issue you had. Senator, explain.
Again, as a guy growing up as a young black guy in America who was followed and surveilled, faced that indignity and even the danger of that, being perceived to be a threat. Again, this is just another example of just conversations that, or lessons that Joe Biden shouldn't have to learn. And there's a lot of his record, from busing to the 1994 crime bill. I was in law school when that was going on, when you saw African-American men being arrested at rates that were unconscionable. I came from Yale and Stanford, where people were using marijuana, using drugs, but lived in a country where there's no difference between drug usage and drug selling between blacks and whites. But African Americans are almost 4 times more likely to be incarcerated for those things. And these are very difficult, painful issues, to the point now that because of a lot of the legislation that Joe Biden endorsed, this war on drugs, which has been a war on people, we now have had a 500% increase in the prison population since 1980, overwhelmingly black and brown. There's more African Americans under criminal supervision today than all the slaves in 1850. These are real, painful, hurtful issues. And again, we need nominees that can speak to this in a way that heals, that brings people together, that rises us up as a country to not only deal with historic and systemic racism, but helps us to come together and deal with our common purpose and common cause.
You think the vice president is just incapable of...
So what do you think? Am I right? If Cory Booker had the luck of the draw, he could have been the Kamala Harris breakout star of the debates. Like, he was all ready to take on Joe Biden the way Kamala Harris did, but he was on the wrong night. What do you think? Is that true? I think based on that answer that he's just one unlucky guy who did not get to take on Joe Biden like Kamala Harris did. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And then the next 4 clips are about the person who I think was kind of a breakout star of the first night of the debates, as I talked about in my debate clip roundup that you can watch down at the link in the video description, and that's Julián Castro. But one thing I noticed at the debates, he had a stronger Spanish accent than he did in his multiple interviews he did this morning. And I'm going to start off, this is him talking about Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador in the debates, and then you compare that to the beginning of his interview with Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press this morning. So here's like a brief clip of him at the debates saying the Northern Triangle countries where all the refugees are coming from asking for asylum over here.
And then we go to the root cause of the issue, which is we need a Marshall Plan for Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of coming to the United States.
So that's at the debate, but I don't know, is he like what they call code talking or or like code switching? Is that what they call it when people of color like speak differently when they're trying to talk to a white audience? But that was pretty much a white audience there. But anyway, you can hear much less of an accent when Julián Castro talks about his immigration plans to Chuck Todd. And I don't think he did as good a job, Chuck Todd and Julián Castro, getting out his immigration plan as he did talking to George Stephanopoulos in the clip I'm going to show next. But like I said, he was the breakout star of the first debate. He got this issue of decriminalizing crossing the border out as an issue. And that's clear from even the NBC News Meet the Press clip that I'll talk about a little more after we watch together over here.
First thing this president should have done is what I've called for, which is a 21st century Marshall Plan to partner with these Northern Triangle countries that many of these people are coming from, whether it's Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala, so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of having to come to the United States. If I'm elected president, I'm going to go to work right away to make sure that we partner with those countries to stem the flow of people who feel so desperate that they need to come to the United States. That's actually a smarter, long-term way to deal with this.
Let me ask you about the politics of these debates. You have some establishment Democrats, some Republicans licking their chops, establishment Democrats wringing their hands, because these debates presented a group of candidates who were, quote, for open borders if you decriminalize, or that you could be painted as for open borders, painted as for using U.S. tax dollars to give health care to undocumented immigrants. That there is concern that a President Trump could exploit that to his gain. What say you?
Number one, The president is going to call Democrats as being for open borders no matter what we say. Nobody's talking about open borders. We have 654 miles of fencing. We have thousands of personnel at the border. We have planes. We have helicopters. We have guns. We have boats. We have security cameras. States like Texas, my home state that I'm in right now, spend an extra $800 million on border security. That's just a right-wing talking point. What we're talking about is maintaining a secure border, but doing things like that 21st century Marshall Plan so that we can actually stem the flow of people here because they can find safety and opportunity at home. We're talking about creating an independent immigration court system with more judges and more support staff so that we can actually get these claims, asylum claims, resolved, and people are not waiting in the United States in limbo for years and years. So if you're somebody who's out there who is concerned about what's happening, I understand that. I'm saying that there's a smarter, there's a more effective way to do this that's also more humane than what we're doing today.
Before I let you go,
So that was okay, and I think there was some explanation there of the whole open borders situation. But I think that Julián Castro and George Stephanopoulos did a much better job of explaining the whole immigration plan and how decriminalizing border crossing isn't the same as open borders, because you'll hear some of the same talking points, but, you know, the immigration system is a civil system, and this is one of the things I talked about in my debate clip roundup, that deportation is not punishment for a crime, it's a civil proceeding. And so to make it a civil violation to cross the border without authority or in between authorized checkpoints, that's not the same as open borders. It just means you're not going to put people in jail. You're going to it still makes them the people who cross the border without authorization can still be deported. And Julián Castro makes that a lot more clear in this longer clip on the same issue from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Okay, let's talk about the debate Wednesday night. You did have a breakthrough performance. You talked a lot about wanting to decriminalize immigrants coming into the United States right now, make it a civil penalty. Again, you've drawn a lot of heat for that, also for the plans that all the Democrats said they wanted to give access to health care for undocumented immigrants. President Trump had a tweet while he was overseas. Want to show that. All Democrats just raised their hands for giving millions of illegal aliens unlimited health care. How about taking care of American citizens first? That's the end of that race. Followed by the New York Post the next morning. Want to show that as well. Who wants to lose this election as all the Democrats raise their hands? Did you give an opening to the Republicans?
Not at all. What I would like every American taxpayer to know is that right now, number one, undocumented immigrants already pay a lot of taxes. Secondly, we already pay for the health care of undocumented immigrants. It's called the emergency room. People show up in the emergency room and they get care as they should. And then third, it is the right thing to do. We're not going to let people living in this country die because they can't see a doctor. That's not who we are as Americans.
The question is at what cost, though? And when you add up all the proposals you're calling for right now, decriminalization of crossing the border, no deportation, absent other crimes, the offer of health benefits, also a possible path to citizenship. I know you reject the rhetoric about open borders, but isn't that effectively open borders not limiting our immigration in any real way?
I would challenge you there, George, on a couple of things. Number one, there's no way that we can call that open borders because we have 654 miles of fencing. We have thousands of personnel at the border. We have planes. We have helicopters, boats, security cameras, guns. That's by no stretch of the imagination open borders. And then, secondly, there is still a civil court process. There are still people who are being deported. There are people applying for asylum that are not granted asylum. So open borders is just a right-wing talking point. It always has been. And I'll say, it doesn't matter what Democrats do on this issue. President Trump and Republicans are always going to say the Democrats are for open borders. I have a completely different vision, a better, stronger vision of how we can be more effective, more humane, and smarter on border security and immigration. And, you know, this president has wasted 2.5 years. He knew that we had a flow of people that were coming from Central America when he became president on January 20th, 2017. He's wasted 2.5 years because he should have done what I've called for, which is a 21st century Marshall Plan with those Northern Triangle countries so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of having to come to the United States.
You talk about safety and opportunity at home, and you have called for that Marshall Plan for Central America. But what is your limiting principle on allowing people in and giving them asylum? There are wide swaths of the entire world mired in poverty, mired in areas where there's high crime. Anyone who's facing that kind of poverty, that kind of crime, should get asylum?
No, and that's not the system that we have now. We have a system to consider asylum claims based on certain criteria where people either qualify for asylum or they don't. You know, I agree with people that say, look, in theory, can we take everyone who would like to be in the United States? Nobody has called for that. I do believe, however, and I've put forward an immigration plan that would accept more people. I'll give you an example of that. By statute from the late 70s or early 80s, we can take in 110,000 refugees annually. Right now, we're only taking in between 30 and 40,000 refugees. I would like to see that go up to the statutory limit. So nobody has called for unlimited number of people coming to this country, but I do believe that we should expand that significantly, and we're big enough to do that. There have been times in our history in this country where we've taken in a lot more people, and we became a stronger nation for it. What's underlying this, and what the president likes to count on, is the fear and the paranoia that he's stoking. I refuse to believe, because it's not true, that the people that are coming because they're desperate, a lot of them women and children, represent some sort of national security threat or cultural threat to this country. That's bull.
Let's talk about Medicare for all.
And like I said, I thought that was a much better refutation of the so-called open borders criticism, and also the appeal to fear and paranoia from Trump regarding immigrants at the border. So I wanted to make sure I showed that expanded answer from Julián Castro, much better from the NBC News than from Chuck Todd's interview on NBC News' Meet the Press. And then the final clip in this Julián Castro set I want to show is actually from Beto O'Rourke, the person who got hammered by Julián Castro on the first night, as I covered in my debates clip roundup. And Margaret Brennan here talks about how he got hit by Julián Castro, but all she talks about as for the reason is saying he didn't do his homework, when it was really about decriminalizing border crossing. And then Margaret Brennan never follows up when Beto O'Rourke still hasn't really fixed that problem with his policy, saying, you know, I want to decriminalize border crossing for asylum seekers, rewrite the law for that, but not totally decriminalizing border crossing. And so this is actually, I think, shows Beto O'Rourke has not learned from what happened to him at the debates, which I'll talk about a little more after we watch it here.
We are just about a month out from the next debate. During the one this week, you were hit by your colleague from Texas, Julián Castro, who said you need to do your homework. Are you going to change your strategy for the next debate?
What I'm going to do is get across what I think we can do as a country. And on the particular issue that you're referring to on immigration, under my administration, day one, we are going to stop family separation. We're going to reunite those families who have been separated. We're going to make sure that no one who is fleeing persecution or violence is criminally prosecuted. And we're going to follow what I was doing in Congress, where we helped to introduce legislation that would stop this and rewrite Section 1325 of U.S. Code to make sure that those families who are at their most desperate and vulnerable moment do not face further fear when they get to the United States. And then, in addition, we're going to rewrite our immigration laws from the ground up. The 9 million green card holders in this country, we're going to waive their citizenship fees so that they can contribute even more to our success and our greatness.
You'll be reliant on bending Republicans to your will on that.
Well, I'm not so sure that I'm willing to concede that point. There are a lot of great candidates running for congressional seats and U.S. Senate seats across this country. I'm confident that 2020 is going to produce a significant change, not just in the White House, but in both houses of Congress. I think that Democratic majority on immigration, on health care, on a more inclusive economy, on confronting the challenge of climate before it's too late, is going to be able to...
If he really wants to have a change in the houses of Congress, why didn't he run for Senate instead of this failed presidential run? Like I said, I think that answer did not show much of a learning curve for Beto O'Rourke, and maybe Bill Maher was right to throw him out, even though he seemed, what was it, Joy Reid said he was like the youth pastor she liked. But anyway, the final clip I want to show is how some of the arguments from the Democratic debates played over in the Fox News universe. This is Chris Wallace showing a clip of Elizabeth Warren and then Bernie Sanders to White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow, and he seems to think, oh, he has all these facts about, the GDP and the low unemployment rate, but it doesn't really talk about the fact that the income inequality, especially that Bernie Sanders talks about in the second clip, he never refutes any of the facts. Chris Wallace, to his credit, shows the clips, but doesn't really follow up on the actual facts and lets Larry Kudlow get away with saying, someone has to fact check them on all this income inequality. I mean, there's been a little bit of wage growth because unemployment has gone so low, but that's just like a small blip every time unemployment hits a low. But most of the income growth and certainly the big Trump tax cuts have all gone to the rich and the corporations, which doesn't really get much follow-up questioning, despite the Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders clips that Chris Wallace posed to Larry Kudlow in this final news clip for the show tonight over here.
I want to squeeze two more questions in, so let's do quicker questions and answers. As you well know, the Democrats held two debates this past week, and they said for all of the president's bragging about a strong U.S. economy, that it isn't working for all Americans. Take a look.
When you've got an economy that does great for those with money and isn't doing great for everyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple. We need to call it out. We need to attack it head on.
How do you respond to that?
I just don't understand in general. I've seen some of this. I hear some of their policies. I hear some of their narrative. I don't understand what planet they're describing. The United States economy is booming. It's running at roughly 3% average since President Trump took office 2.5 years ago. On this business about bad distribution, the blue-collar workers, the non-supervisory workers have done the best. They're the ones running wages at 3.5%. Their growth in incomes and wages is exceeding the growth of their supervisors. The unemployment rate is low. We just had the best June stock market, the Dow Jones, in over 80 years. That's going to fill up the 401ks of middle-class folks everywhere.
But let me pick up on. Let me just pick up.
I don't understand. But I don't understand. I mean, this is very important. These are factual issues, okay? I understand that there's a political spin, but these are factual, measurable areas. And I would just say I do not understand their narrative. We are in a strong prosperity cycle.
But Larry, let me interrupt your campaign speech. I don't think you would disagree.
It's not a campaign speech. I'm citing facts and figures, my friend.
All I'm saying is this. I don't think there's any question. You would agree, and I'm going to be talking with Tom Perez later about the economic record, but there is clearly a stark income inequality in this country. Bernie Sanders pressed that point. Take a look.
At a time when we have 3 people in this country owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, while 500,000 people are sleeping out on the streets today, we think it is time for change, real change.
I got 30 seconds for an answer. If President Trump is reelected in 2020, what specifically will he do to reduce, not eliminate, but to reduce the huge gap between the wealthy and the poor in this country?
Look, what we're doing right now We've got, again, I'll repeat this, the best manufacturing, autos, blue-collar work recovery, the fastest increase in jobs, the fastest increase in wages. Those are facts. We've seen this goes on for many decades, the best performance. I do not know what some of the candidates are saying. I don't know what their factual basis is. Economic growth, a strong and durable prosperity cycle, and I will make this warning. Some of the policies I've heard in some of these early debates, in my judgment, would do great, great damage to this prosperity and jobs and income and wage cycle that we are experiencing. So somebody's got to do a little bit of fact checking here on what some of these candidates are saying. I would simply say this: the economy is strong. The narrative I'm hearing from the other side, it just ain't so.
Larry Kudlow, thank you.
And that was the lack of follow-up there. I don't know. Fact-checking just ain't so. Who do you think is right there? Is it more income inequality or prosperity cycle? I mean, like I said, there's been a blip up in wage growth with the very low unemployment rates, but that happens, you know, right at the end of the business cycle before the next recession, which, well, I guess we'll see. But anyway, that's the show. I hope you appreciate the work I put in and the clips I picked out. I appreciate the live viewers. I appreciate, of course, the recorded show viewers, and also especially the people who contributed on Super Chat during the live show. Thanks, Lulu Girl. Sorry, Foderick, I'm not wearing a green shirt. Maybe next week. But also give me a thumbs up. Give me a supportive comment just to support the show. Also down in the video description, you can give direct financial contributions on PayPal, on Patreon. Oh, and I did want to give you all the bonus Dash and Sandy clip. Not much Dash and Sandy interaction today. I caught them briefly at the food and water bowl this evening over here. That's the Dash and Sandy clip. And until next Sunday, and for every Sunday for the foreseeable future, I will be back with my live clip roundup, my criticism, my commentary, my clip selection for all of you. And I guess until then, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.